Welcome back to Filling in the History. Today is a wacky long day. So I have been, in full disclosure, I have been using the guidelines of, what sections are we covering based on a book that the church publishes called Come Follow Me. And I was under the naive impression that that was like little bite-sized pieces. Today is not the case there. Today might be the longest episode that I've ever done. So please forgive me if that uh, anyway, is a problem. I'm going to be on the YouTube channel. If you don't know, I break each one of the parts into a separate video, a little bit more bite-sized that way. And then for Spotify and Apple Podcasts, it's, just the full audio show. So I'm not sure how long today's going to be, but it's big. So what we're going to be doing today is sections 51 through 57. And although on the face of it, there is, I mean, these are not like enormously long sections. The history surrounding a lot of these is really big. And since we're filling in history, and that's the name of the game here, um, it's going to be a long one. So what we've got today for you is a couple of things that are not in the Doctrine and Covenants. We do have 51 through 57, but we also have an unpublished revelation that was never printed anywhere. We have minutes of a general conference meeting, some notes on some ordinations that come just right after that in what's called Minute Book 2. And then we are going to do a little bit about W Phelps, who joins the picture here and gets his own revelation. And W Phelps or William W. Phelps, I should say, is a colossal figure in Latter-day Saint history. And also, to this day, there's a lot of things that W Phelps has done that we still do today. Pretty crazy. So a very influential person. So I'm going to light right into this. I'm probably going to go kind of fast through this thing, so please forgive me, but this is going to be a long one. So right now, just so that you know, too, we are in May of 1831. We're going to go through June of 1831, and in those 2 months, these many revelations and all the rest of this stuff happens. So we're actually going to start with an unpublished revelation, and this is to Ezra Thayer and Joseph Smith Sr. It was never published anywhere. The Joseph Smith Papers copy that we get, there's two copies that we get. We get Revelation Book 1 and another copy in Revelation Book 2. There's no footnotes or introductions in that version, in the Revelation Book 2 version, so we'll focus basically just on Revelation Book 1. And again, this is the handwriting of John Whitmer in Revelation Book 1. For Revelation Book 2, it is Frederick G. Williams' handwriting. But it was never published outside of these two. This is all you get, Revelation Book 1 and 2, that's it. So again, many thanks to the reorganized church, to the community of Christ, if you will, that preserved this, Revelation Book 1, and to the church history department for doing the same, because otherwise we wouldn't have this. The historical introduction that we get from the Joseph Smith Papers Project, this is from Documents Volume 1, is this. Joseph Smith dictated this revelation while Williams was in Missouri on a mission to the American Indians. Despite Williams' absence, the revelation addressed the situation of those living on his land and apparently referred to a legal dispute surrounding the property. We'll get to this in a second. So the crux of the issue behind this is Williams acquired 144 acres of land with at least one accompanying house by means of an exchange of land with Kirtland resident Isaac Moore in the winter of 1829 and 1830. Moore took possession of Williams' 140 and a half acres in Warrensville, Ohio, while Williams received Moore's Kirtland holdings. The two properties differed by a value of $500, in part because the Kirtland property included a house and possibly other structures. Now, to be clear here, we're talking about Isaac Moore. There's also Isaac Morley, very different people, for reasons you will very soon find out. So a little bit more about Isaac Moore. This is from footnote 7. Was a Campbellite historian. A Campbellite historian gave this account of Moore's response to the rise of Mormonism in the Kirtland area. Quote, the opposition to it was quick on its feet, in rank, and doing effective work to check the imposture. Isaac Moore stood up and became a shield to many. The same historian later referred to Moore as a leading member of the Campbellite movement in the area. In a letter written years later, Jasper Jesse Moss, a Kirtland resident and follower of Alexander Campbell, explained that he and Moore were the first to begin, quote, the battle in opposition to Mormon teachings in Kirtland. Moss explained that they did so initially at a Mormon meeting with, quote, Brother Moore making the first speech and I the second the same evening. In one of their meetings, and the battle once begun, we never ceased firing. So, not a good relationship there. So, continuing on with the historical introduction, while Moore apparently already paid $100 towards the difference in the property value, the revelation suggests that he had refused to vacate the house on the Kirtland property, probably waiting the receipt of the balance due before turning over the property entirely to Williams. Moore's refusal was likely also influenced by Williams's recent baptism into the Church of Christ. Moore was a leader of the Campbellite group in the Kirtland area, and he had vociferously resisted the efforts of the earliest missionaries to make converts among those belonging to the movement. Not only had Williams embraced the teachings of the Mormon proselyters, he had also joined them on their mission to preach to the Indians in the area around western Missouri. Whether motivated by his religious opposition to the new Mormon faith or by financial concerns, or a mixture of both, Moore's opposition in the dispute over the farm was enough for the revelation to refer to him as a, quote, adversary. Moore's refusal to leave may even have led to a legal dispute between the two parties. So a lot of drama here. Basically what it is that these residents have showed up, they want to buy property. And this guy, which I don't think is a wrong thing to do, basically says, look, we have a $500 difference here. We need to make this up. And I'm not leaving until I get my money. And that's fine. Like, I've bought and sold houses before. Like, that's entirely normal, I think. Little extra sauce on that. But yeah, that was what all that led to. This is also referring, by the way, to Frederick G. Williams. I apologize. We're just using last names. But yeah, so Frederick G. Williams versus Isaac Moore. And in this case, I think, again, I personally, whatever their feelings might be about religion, I think that this dispute is is reasonable. Pay me my money before you take over my property. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do. So we get some more and more drama out of this, though. So again, historical introduction. Other factors contributed to the need for a resolution of the ongoing dispute about the property. Although Joseph Smith Sr. had been in Kirtland for some time, his wife Lucy had recently arrived from New York with 8 members of their family, and they were all staying in the crowded accommodations temporarily provided for them in the house in the home of Isaac and Lucy Morley. Again, different people. More permanent living arrangements for the Smith family were anticipated in the home on Williams Farm once Moore departed. The revelation commanded that payments to Moore be ended until he fulfill his part of the bargain, indicating that the Mormons saw Moore's refusal to vacate the property as a breach of the agreement between Moore and Williams. This cessation of payments, rather than the legal suit mentioned by Williams, may have motivated Moore to move to Warrensville. In any case, Moore vacated the house by late May 1831, and it was soon occupied by Lucy Mack Smith and her family. So a little more detail here. I guess part of the tension there is the idea of like, hey, we're not going to give you your money until you do it. Promise us what you promised us. So yeah, again, a very common dispute, makes a lot of sense. There's a covenant relationship here. You need to keep both sides of it. So some of the content here. So it's not a long revelation. So if you don't mind, I am just going to read it out because there may never be a time when you read this because it's only handwritten by either John Whitmer or Frederick G. Williams. So I also find it interesting that Frederick got to, write it out himself in Revelation Book 2. But here's what it actually says. Quote, Hearken unto my words, and behold, I will make known unto you what you shall do, as it shall be pleasing unto me. For verily I say unto you, it must needs be that ye let the bargain stand that ye have made concerning these farms, until it be so fulfilled. Behold, ye are holden for the one, even so likewise thine adversary is holden for the other. Wherefore it must needs be that ye pay no more money for the present time, until the contract be fulfilled. And let my servant Joseph, which is Joseph Smith Sr., and his family go into the house after thine adversary is gone. And let my servant Ezra board with him, and let all the brethren immediately assemble together to put up an house for my servant Ezra. And let my servants Frederick G. Williams' family remain, and let the house be repaired, and their wants be supplied. And when my servant Frederick returns from the west, Behold, he taketh his family to the west. Let that which belongeth to my servant Frederick be secured unto him by deed or bond, and thus he willeth that the brethren reap the good thereof. Let my servant Joseph, again, Smith Sr., govern the things of the farm and provide for the families, and let him have help in as much as he standeth in need. Let my servant Ezra humbleth himself, and at the conference meeting he shall be ordained unto power from on high. And he shall go from thence, if he be obedient unto my commandments, and proclaim my gospel unto the western regions with my servants, that must go forth even unto the borders of the Lamanites. For behold, I have great work, a great work for them to do, and it shall be given unto you to know what ye shall do at the conference meeting. Even so, amen. What shall the brethren do with their money? You shall go forth and seek diligently among the brethren, and obtain lands, and save the money, that it may be consecrated to purchase lands in the west for an everlasting inheritance. Even so, amen. All right. So that's the actual revelation. And once again, a good rule of thumb, if you hear amen at the end of something, that might be another revelation. And in this case, that is everyone's best guess. That whole thing about what shall the brethren do with their money was actually probably referring to people in Palmyra and was a different revelation, which Oliver Cowdery will back me up here in a second about. So that's the revelation. There you go. Now you know who the adversary is. Apparently this Isaac Moore guy. Which, by the way, I work in corporate America, and being adversarial is not necessarily like some evil thing either. It's just the nature of maybe the relationship between the two. So again, I'm not going to cast evil upon Isaac Moore. I think he was probably doing what he thought it was right. Anyway, so footnote 4 we get from this section, from this. It's not a section that was never published, but from this portion of text. When copying this revelation into Revelation Book 2, Williams wrote prepared instead of repaired, apparently indicating that a house needed to be built, not just renovated. It is not known which text is in error. Renovated houses, and there's a big difference between prepared and repaired. So I added that note for very, very personal and emotional reasons. Because, wow, renovating is awful. But anyway, footnote 6 is long, very long. Probably one of the longest I've ever seen. So I'm going to summarize this here. Frederick G. Williams had an outstanding debt on the Kirtland farm that he owned. So we get this, quote, Brother Frederick G. Williams exchanged a farm he owned in Warrensville for Moore's farm in Kirtland. Hence, why did Moore move to Warrensville? That's why. On which the Smith family had moved, agreeing to pay $400 for the difference at the stated time. Just before the time expired for the payment of his money, Brother Joseph Coe, who was asked to raise it, said he could not, for his wife held the money, and she did not belong to the church. I, being present, told Brother Joseph that I could raise the money, he said. If I would, I should be blessed. This was on Saturday. I told him I would have to raise the money. So, the wife didn't trust people with her money, and she wasn't a member of the church. So, lots of drama going on behind the scenes here. So, what happened here is that he owned about 560 acres in the Illyria. It's a great name for a town. Joseph Smith advised him to sell his property to a government agent because apparently the government had sold more land at this time than they owned. I'm telling you, drama everywhere. Whoopsie daisy. Some government agent sold more land than he had a right to sell. So they were kind of paying people back for it because they made a boo-boo. Anyway, moving on. So here we go. From, I believe this is Frederick G. Williams. Says, Sunday morning, I hitched up my carriage and drove to Cleveland, 28 miles away. The next morning, I went and saw Case, who's the government agent, and told him my business. He said that he could offer only $1.25 an acre. I told him that under my circumstances, I would have to let him have it. I then made him out a deed amounting to $700. I went to the bank and had to wait until the money was cut and signed, this being the first money that had been issued from the Cleveland Bank. I then returned home and paid $400 over to Joseph, which saved the farm. So we're making money here, quite literally. So this bank, and if you don't know, there used to never be a Federal Reserve, and therefore no Federal Reserve notes. And I believe we talked about this in a previous episode. But this bank was actually printing their own money. So there was a deed there, and they actually had to chop up pieces of paper, sign it with the treasurer of that bank, and that cash was what he took back, and that's what saved the farm. And that's what gave the Smith family a place to live. Yeah, this is all wacky and a revelation that you've never read. Footnote 8 to this whole thing. Lucy Mack Smith later wrote that, quote, "On this farm, my family were all established with this arrangement that we were to cultivate the farm, and the produce was to be applied to the support of our families, and the use of persons who came to the place and had no acquaintances there." Her account gives no indication of the troubles apparently surrounding the appropriation and administration of the farm. That is an understatement. Footnote 11. This question and the following paragraph appear not to be related to what preceded, although they may have been dictated by this at the same time as the preceding material. It is also possible that the question may not have been a part of the original dictation, but rather added later by a scribe in an attempt to clarify the impetus for the lines that follow. Oliver Cowdery later, probably in 1833, crossed out the question and added a notation that this part of the revelation was to the Palmyra church. This is what we're referring to. That bottom part was actually a separate revelation, if you will, to the Palmyra church people. Now, I think it's reasonable to say maybe it was spoken at the same time. But I will say that, bonus, you get two. There's actually two revelations that you may have never heard of that are here. So what's the aftermath of this? So we have this farm. It's in dispute. Frederick G. Williams hitches up his carriage. He goes to this government agent, loses some money on it, but he gets about $700. Okay. Pays it off. Lucy Mack gets to have a home. Everybody's kind of crowded, and so it's helpful. So what's the aftermath of all of this? What happened later? Even more drama happens later. So difficulties concerning the farm and its management apparently continued after this revelation. A subsequent revelation dated 15 June 1831 suggests that Ezra Thayer may have been the one who paid the $100 towards satisfying a portion of the debt on the property. Thayer may have attempted to obtain some sort of title to a portion of the farm, as the 15 June revelation declared that, quote, "there shall no divisions be made upon the land," unquote, and that Thayer could neither go on his mission to Missouri or, quote, "otherwise he shall receive the money which he has paid, and shall leave the place, and shall be cut off out of my church," unquote. A few months later, on 10 October 1831, a church conference reproved both Thayer and Joseph Smith Sr. for the, quote, "unwise course they have taken." The conference further directed that Brother Frederick G. Williams' family be provided with a comfortable dwelling by this church, indicating that perhaps the reproof of Smith and Thayer was partly for their subsequent failure to build a house and see that the, quote, "wants to be supplied" for Williams' family, as directed in this revelation. The minutes of the October conference refer to the directions given in this revelation as a commandment of the Lord. And so if you don't know, we're going to get to this in a moment. There's a whole revelation where Ezra Thayer was supposed to go on a mission, I believe, with Thomas B. Marsh, and it was revoked. Well, this was why. This was the whole reason why. They didn't build the house like they should have. I guess the money wasn't paid for the way it should have done. And there was just there's just so much drama behind this farm. Lots of problems, lots of things to come out. And apparently this revelation sort of set everything in motion. So, kind of going back to this extra revelation, there's a little bit more here from the historical introduction to this unpublished revelation, and then we'll be done. The final paragraph of this document, separated from the first section by, quote, "Amen," was likely another revelation received the same day, perhaps even at the same time. It begins with the question, quote, "what shall the brethren do with their money?" unquote, and was apparently not referring to Joseph Smith Sr. or Ezra Thayer. Oliver Cowdery later added a notation to this paragraph indicating that it was, quote, "to the Palmyra church." The group of members from Palmyra had only recently arrived in Kirtland, and this section of the text directs them to obtain lands and save some of the money to be consecrated to purchase land for their everlasting inheritance in the West. So there you go. An entire revelation, never published, with loads of drama. And there's the government agent, and there's Isaac Moore, not to be confused with Morley, who doesn't want to leave, and he breaks his covenant, and blah, blah, blah. There's just a ton of stuff going on. So That being said, we're going to move right along for the sake of time, but lots of drama, fun stuff. Section 51. So now we're getting into a revelation that you maybe have seen. So as a paper's introduction to Section 51, the first version that we get is in Revelation Book 1, handwriting of John Whitmer. It is marked, as you can see here, not printed at the heading. That was written by John Whitmer. Corrections were made in the hand of Joseph Smith to add Edward's last name, which is interesting here. This might be an indication of how they spoke back then. He spells it Patridge, right? Patrage, or Pat Rage, which I hope not. I hope Pat's in a good position here. But Patridge, right? That might have been how they spoke back then, or maybe how Joseph Smith heard it. But I find it fun that in every instance here, as you can see, there's all these last names, and Joseph Smith apparently wanted to make sure that you knew which Edward we were talking about. It's kind of fun. There's some other text that was modified here in Oliver Cowdery's hand. So one of the things that he did is he added, quote, of him who holders if he harden not his heart, unquote. And then just telling you what it says. Another addition here, quote, if my people break not their covenant, unquote. Those are both in the hand of Oliver Cowdery. There's a mark here in an unknown hand, and the footnote to this says, and this is from the facsimile edition, it says, following this bracket, the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants prints approximately 5 lines of text not found in this version of the Revelation. So there's some extra things that were added here. And I'm not going to read those out again for the sake of time, but some significant changes there that probably just occurred right before they were printing it. Anyway, so that's what that mark is. It's not a take mark. We've talked about that before. This is something else. We do get a take mark later on. So hold on to your seats for that take mark. But anyway, we have copies found in Sidney Gilbert's notebook, as well as in Revelation Book 2. So there's a few of these, which is kind of fun because I believe Sidney Gilbert is actually referenced in this. So nice that he would write it down in his own notebook. We, of course, get a copy in the Manuscript History of the Church. We do not get anything in the Book of Commandments. It is not printed. That's why it says not printed. But it is called Section 23 in the Doctrine and Covenants 1835 edition. The section heading differences are mainly date specific. So in 1981, you get May of 1831 versus May 20th of 1831 in the 2013. But the wording is the same. Obviously, the history of the church reference is taken out. But basically, there's just that specificity of dates. Those are the differences in modern scripture, just in the section headings. Okay, so some introductions to this. Revelation Book 1 gives us this. 54 commandment, kind of says it again, 54 come. A revelation given to the bishop at Thompson, Ohio, May 20th, 1831, concerning the property of the church, etc. Sidney Gilbert's notebook gives us, given at Thompson, May 20th, 1831. Revelation Book 2 says, Thompson's on May 20th, 1831. So you get a lot of specifics. Manuscript History of the Church, their introduction says, 20th of May, 1831, which was a Friday. I love that they give us the day of the week. I think it's fun. Not long after the foregoing was received, which was section 50, the saints from the state of New York began to come on, and it seemed necessary to settle them. At the solicitation of Bishop Edward Partridge, I inquired and received the following revelation given May 1831 to Joseph Smith Jr. Cool. So those are what I would call the contemporary introductions. The historical introduction from Documents Volume 1. The group of 60 or more members residing in and around Colesville in Broome and Chenango counties, New York, constituted one of 3 groups that emigrated from New York to Ohio. Under the leadership of Newell Knight, they left their homes in mid-April 1831. Their month-long journey included a delay in Buffalo, New York for more than a week because of ice on the harbor. In the harbor, sorry. Or maybe on the harbor, if you will. Once vessels were again able to navigate, the group sailed for Fairport, Ohio, and arrived in Kirtland area in mid-May. So they made this journey in the middle of winter. So what happened after they arrived? Further to this, in the historical introduction, Knight later wrote that upon their arrival, it was advised that the Colesville branch remain together to go to a neighboring town called Thompson, as a man by the name of Leman Copley owned a considerable tract of land there, which he offered to let the brethren occupy. And we know where that led to. That one, section 49, if you haven't seen the episode, that was not well received, and that did not end well. So I will leave that to a previous episode. But wow, yeah, that one didn't go very well. So what was the ask here? Why the revelation? Well, we get this. The revelation presented here gave specific directions to Partridge about how he should implement the consecration of properties and money in Thompson among the newly arrived Colesville members. Although Copley apparently offered to allow church members to live on his land in exchange for making improvements upon it, he may have lacked clear title, as possibly suggested by the language in this revelation that instructed Partridge to, quote, go and obtain a deed or article of this land, unquote. Joseph Knight Sr.'s later history affirmed that one of Joseph Smith's revelations gave instructions, quote, to purchase 1,000 acres of land which was claimed by Leman Copley and not paid for, unquote. Yeah, get your paperwork in order. So, anyway, I find it interesting, though, that even under the circumstances, if everything would have worked out fine with Leman Copley, they don't just live there. They were there to plant crops, and they did. They sowed fields. They were getting ready for spring. They made improvements to the homes and the property that was there. So, I mean, they did their part while they were on the land, but it wasn't like just for free. There was some labor that they had to perform. So let's get a little into the content and footnotes of this. So a passage from the Revelation reads this: "And let that which belongeth to this people not be taken and given unto that of another church. Wherefore, if another church would receive money of this church, let them pay unto this church according as they shall agree. And this shall be done through the bishop or the agent which shall be appointed by the voice of the church." Now, when I read this for the longest time, I thought this was referring to another religious organization, but footnote 5 here gives this. The 9th February revelation did not outline demarcations between the property consecrated in one branch of the church as opposed to the property consecrated in branches located in other areas. So a very important distinction here. For a lot of these revelations, when they talk about this church or that church or other churches, what they're actually talking about in our vernacular today would be a branch or a ward. Which leads me to a very interesting side note. We still do this today. So, for example, there are two very common, very repetitive, I should say, very repetitive donations to the church, which is tithing is one, and the other one is fast offerings. And what's interesting about it is that tithing kind of goes to the general church, but fast offerings are usually meant for the ward itself, and it's to help the people in that immediate area. The bishop is to care for the people in that immediate area. And so, in some cases, if there's a need elsewhere, and maybe not so much, like if my ward has a lot of need and your ward doesn't, and you're next to us or whatever, then what we can do is the bishop and those agents can talk to each other, transfer those funds in order to make it work. But it all has to be very, very carefully guided. So I find it funny that this revelation is still honored to this day, where, there are general funds, there are stake funds, there are ward funds, and we are very careful about that inside of the church. And I say we, but it's mostly bishops. I've personally never been a bishop as of this recording. So, but I do know from my, service in the church that that's what they do. So kind of an interesting footnote there. We also get another passage from the Revelation says, quote, "I grant unto this people a privilege of organizing themselves according to my laws, and I consecrate unto them this land for a little season, until I the Lord shall provide for them otherwise, and command them to go hence, and the hour and the day is not given unto them. Wherefore let them act upon this land as for years, and this shall turn unto them for their good." Footnote 9 to this says, "A revelation in March 1831 informed church members that the gathering to Ohio was temporary, and that, quote, in time, you may be enabled to purchase lands for an inheritance, even the city," unquote. The anticipated city, the New Jerusalem, was to be built, according to a September 1830 revelation, somewhere, quote, among the Lamanites. But in May 1831, the precise location was still unknown. So to me, again, it's kind of sad, but maybe if you're already in a moving mode, it's not so bad. But I mean, here they are. They moved in January. This is May, and they're kind of already told, yeah, like this isn't it. We're going to continue moving on from here. Now, it could have been like we do today, where we still believe in the church that this Zion area, this New Jerusalem, is the center stake, and that everybody else is in stakes. That's why we call them stakes. They're stakes of Zion. We don't serve delicious meat in our steakhouse. It's a steak center. Um, anyway, so there's a chance that maybe these people would have said, "Hey, you stay here. This will be a stake, and we'll move on and go build Zion or whatever." But they were told quite early that this was not the end. So the aftermath of this revelation is what I call the Copley issue. So from the historical introduction, there was little opportunity to do as this revelation directed, because Copley soon rescinded his agreement to permit the Colesville group to live and work on his land. This occurred after Copley's early May mission to the Shaker settlement at North Union, Ohio, and sometime before 6th of June, 1831. Neither Partridge nor Colesville church members would have another opportunity to implement the principles of consecration expressed in this and other revelations until they arrived in Missouri. And this will be visited in section 57. So we'll discuss this later in the episode. Yes, that is part one. So as you can see, there's a revelation given. They had all these plans. If you're not aware of it, in the last episode that we had, section 49 is a revelation specifically to the Shaker community, because Leman Copley wanted to go preach to them. Joseph gives them a revelation. Sidney Rigdon reads it out loud. Parley P. Pratt does not like the response that he gets, because they're all like, yeah, we're not on board with this. You guys can leave now. Sidney stays for dinner. Parley kind of creates a scene, bit of a contentious thing. He leaves, and Leman Copley sort of chastised for this by his former friends and decides to leave the church and go back to the Shakers and kicks everybody off of his property. So that is a very short version of a very tragic story there. And maybe a reasonable one at the same time. So anyway, that's part one. In part two, we're going to be going over a general conference minutes that we get, as well as Doctrine and Covenants, section 52. So hang in there. This is going to be a big one today. Hopefully that was a lot of fun. We'll see you in a moment for part two. Let's keep on keeping on. So this is part two, what I'm calling General Conference Minutes and section 52. So lighting right into this, this is minutes of a General Conference meeting on the 3rd of June, 1831. So an introduction to the papers that we have here. This copy is found in something called Minute Book 2 on pages 3 and 4. So this is right at the beginning. This is the handwriting of Ebenezer Robinson. So kind of a new character here, a new set of handwriting that we may not have seen before. Little about the source material from the historical introduction, quite frankly, but we do get Minute Book 2. The source for this document was not inscribed until 1838 and contains parenthetical insertions that were not original to the minutes. They were likely added by John Whitmer sometime after the creation of the original minutes, probably as he copied the loose minutes into a single book. When Ebenezer Robinson copied Whitmer's minutes, no longer extant, into Minute Book 2, he apparently copied these parenthetical redactions faithfully. Now, in the far future from now, you have something called the Council of 50, and I know that sometimes what they would do is they would, have a loose copy. Basically, they would write them as they go. They would copy them into the book, and then a lot of times they would burn the originals for whatever reason. But that may have been what happened here. But we do not have the original minutes. This is what we have. So this is actually written down much later, but the events are chronological. So some circumstantial introductions to these. The historical introduction further gives us, in early June of 1831, Joseph presided over a general conference of the Church of Christ in Kirtland, Ohio. During one of the conference meetings, the first recorded ordinations to the high priesthood occurred, several of them performed by Joseph Smith himself. These are not the most thorough notes of a meeting, I will say. But so there's a lot of gaps here. There's a lot of kind of general things. But I will give you this from the historical introduction. It says, in any case, the minutes focus primarily on attendance and ordinations to offices in the church, and no attempt was made to record the content of the discourses or the events of the individual meetings as they unfolded. So there's a lot of phraseology here where, and I'm just going to read this out to you because the notes are really short, but basically there's a lot of speeches given, if you will. We just don't have much of that. That's what that's referring to. And also in the section heading for this, you're going to see that it's like, hey, there were some ordinations to the high priesthood. This fills that history in, which is the point of the exercise. So, yeah. Now, the question is was this the first time the Melchizedek priesthood was used in the church formally? So usually it was spoken of as the high priesthood. So we get a little more from Historical Introduction. This is Documents Volume 1. In John Correll's 1839 history, he used the term Melchizedek priesthood instead of high priesthood, as though the two were synonymous. He explained that, quote, the Melchizedek priesthood was then for the first time introduced and conferred on several of the elders. In this chiefly consisted the endowment, it being a new order, a bestowed authority, unquote. Joseph Smith's history uses very similar language, further suggesting that Melchizedek was first publicly used in ordinations in the June 1831 conference. Quote, the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood was manifested and conferred for the first time upon several of the elders, unquote. So that's where it all begins, was this particular conference. In Old Testament scripture, only one person at a time was ordained to this high priesthood, but the Book of Mormon implies that several individuals at the same time could be ordained to this priesthood. So there was, in a sense, kind of a bit of a change here, where instead of it only being Moses or Isaiah, who the high priest was at the time, it was being democratized. There was a lot of people that were a part of this. So notes from Joseph Smith Discourses. Here we go. Although the minutes report only the fact that Joseph Smith spoke, several participants later recorded lengthy accounts of his teachings during the meetings. Jared Carter was impressed enough to write in his journal that, quote, notwithstanding, he is not naturally talented for a speaker, yet he was filled with the power of the Holy Ghost, so that he spoke as I never heard man speak, for God by the power of the Holy Ghost spake in him, unquote. Parley P. Pratt recalled that Joseph Smith, quote, spake in great power as he was moved by the Holy Ghost, and the spirit of power and of testimony rested down upon the elders in a marvelous manner, unquote. So a little bit of what it's like to be in a general conference with Joseph Smith. So let's get into the content. The minutes are very brief, so I'll just read them off to you. Conference opened by Brother Joseph Smith Jr. in exhortation and prayer. Prayer by Brother Sidney Rigdon, and exhortation by the same. Exhortation by most of the elders present, Brothers Lyman White, John Murdoch, Reynolds Cahoon, Harvey Whitlock, and Hiram Smith were ordained to the high priesthood under the hand of Brother Joseph Smith Jr. Exhortation by Brothers Lyman White and Harvey Whitlock, Brothers Parley P. Pratt, Thomas B. Marsh, Isaac Morley, Edward Partridge, Joseph Wakefield, Martin Harris, Ezra Thayer, Ezra Booth, denied the faith, John Correll, Samuel H. Smith, Solomon Hancock, Simeon Carter, Wheeler Baldwin, Jacob Scott, denied the faith, Joseph Smith Sr., John Whitmer, Joseph Smith Jr., and Sidney Rigdon were ordained to the high priesthood under the hand of Brother Lyman White. The bishop, Edward Partridge, then blessed those who were ordained in the name of Christ according to commandment. Brother John Correll and Isaac Morley were ordained assistants to the bishop under the hand of Lyman White. Exhortation by Brother Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith Jr., closed by prayer by Brother Sidney Rigdon, John Whitmer, clerk. So these exhortations, you could call them prophecies, discourses, talks, testimonies, whatever floats your boat. But yeah, that was the whole conference. That's all you get. We don't know what they said. And for as far as we can tell, according to this, it was all in one day, but there's other sources that indicate that it could have spanned over a period of time. So there you go. That is a general conference minutes that were kept by Ebenezer Robinson in the 1838 Minute Book 2. So a little bit there. We're going to be referring back to this and kind of going back and forth to this. This is the conference that was referred to in the previous Revelation. So yeah, it's all there. We're going to keep going back and forth to that one. Section 52. Let's move on. Earliest version of Section 52 is in Revelation Book 1, handwriting of John Whitmer. The last names were added parenthetically by John Whitmer as well, and not by Joseph Smith. I know in previous revelations we had that. That's not the case here. Maybe he just learned his lesson and did it himself. I don't know. Anyway, William W. Phelps has handwriting in here, and he's adding verse numbering to the revelation. So that's what handwriting that is. Most changes on these pages are name corrections and verse numbering. So that's all you get. Also appears this revelation in Sidman's Rider copy, which is, he had his own copy of these revelations, as well as in the manuscript history of the church. It is called chapter 54 in the Book of Commandments and section 66 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. So the 1981 and 2013 section headings are identical. The 1981 shows the 7th of June, 1831, as the 2013 says June 6th, 1831. So hopefully that doesn't blow your hair off too much. So 1 day difference there. Circumstantially to this, Revelation Book 1 gives us this introduction. It is called the 55th Commandment, given at Kirtland, June 6th, 1831. Directions to the elders of the Church of Christ, etc. And that wording is basically the same used for the Book of Commandments and the Doctrine and Covenants, by the way. So copy-paste. No introduction given with Simon's Rider, probably there, but it's just not in the Joseph Smith papers itself. But, you know, it kind of just lights into the content of the revelation. Manuscript history starts writing the introduction, strikes it out, and then starts again. And they're very nice strike-throughs, by the way. So much so that we actually know whose handwriting they are. They belong to Willard Richards. So apparently he was just super duper good. I'm going to call it, William, I think you used a ruler or some sort of a straight edge on that one. They're very pretty, very nice. But anyway, the manuscript history says this twice because one of them struck out. But it says, on the 6th of June, the elders from the various parts of the country where they were laboring came in, and the conference before appointed convened in Kirtland, and the Lord displayed his power to the most perfect satisfaction of the saints. And then this is struck through, in a manner that could not be mistaken. The man of sin was revealed, and the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood was manifested. End strike through. Joseph Smith talking in the first person here, conferred the high priesthood for the first time upon several of the elders. It was clearly evident that the Lord gave us power in proportion to the work to be done, and strength according to the race set before us, and grace and help as our needs required. Great harmony prevailed. Several were ordained. Faith was strengthened. And humility, so necessary for the blessing of God to follow prayer, characterized the saints. The next day, as a kind continuation of this great work of the last days, I received the following, and then revelation given June 1831 to Joseph Smith, Jr. So again, cancellations given there by Willard Richards. So yeah, quite a lot going on there. And we're going to get into what this man of sin thing is, because that definitely has a footnote to it. Historical introduction further gives to us. In June 1831, a conference was held in Kirtland, Ohio, which all of the elders of the church had been directed to attend by a February revelation. As part of the conference, according to Levi Hancock, many church members gathered on 5th of June, quote, on the hill in a field where there was a large concourse of people collected, unquote. Joseph Smith addressed the congregation and told them that, quote, from that time the elders would have large congregations to speak to, and they must soon take their departure into the regions west, unquote. The next day, 6th of June, the conference continued, and that night Joseph Smith dictated the text featured here, later writing that he received it, quote, by an heavenly vision, unquote. So they found a hill, they stood on top of it, and they spoke to each other. So, and I just kind of love that. It's a very pastoral vision of just, people talking and sitting and preaching to each other out in the grass, out in the fields. It's kind of fun. Further to this, the revelation declared that the next conference would be held in Missouri and directed the elders to travel to Missouri 2 by 2 by different routes, preaching along the way. Nearly all the men who had been ordained to the high priesthood a few days earlier were now called to preach, as were several others. The revelation further instructed Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon to leave for Missouri as soon as possible, promising that if they were faithful, the Lord would make known the location in Missouri of, quote, the land of your inheritance, unquote. So everybody that you see on that list was called to serve a mission. Again, something that is very true to today's culture. Usually you are not ordained to be an elder, even if you turn 18, 19, 20, or whatever, unless there's some reason for it. And it's usually either being sealed in the temple or serving a full-time mission. I know that was my experience. Like I got called and they said, okay, you have to be ordained, you need to go get endowed, and then you can go on your mission. So this sort of like be ordained and away you go sort of thing is very much true today. So a couple of content and footnotes here. From the revelation we get, just a portion of it here says, and again, he that is overcome and bringeth not forth fruits even according to this pattern is not of me, wherefore by this pattern you shall know all the spirits in all cases under the whole heavens. So footnote 7. This pattern provided further guidance in dealing with the persistent problem of what Joseph Smith deemed unacceptable spiritual phenomena since his arrival in Ohio 4 months earlier. So, if you haven't seen it, there's people like writhing on the floor and blowing papers around and hooping and hollering and doing all sorts of stuff that way. So that's what he's referring to, and that's what part of this revelation is all about. So that's what you get there. Further into the revelation we get, let my servant Edward Partridge and Martin Harris take their journey with my servants Sidney and Joseph. Footnote 9 to this says, Lydia Clisby Partridge left an account of the circumstances under which her husband Edward received this revelatory injunction. Their children had all contracted the measles from some of the recently arrived New York. I'm just going to do that again. Their children had all contracted the measles from some of the recently arrived New York members who were staying with their family. She wrote that their, quote, eldest daughter was taken down with lung fever, and while she was at the worst, my husband was called by revelation to go with a number of others to Missouri to locate a place for the gathering of the saints. The unbelievers thought he must be crazy or he would not go, and I thought myself that I had no reason to think my trials had commenced. And so they had. But this trial, like all others, was followed with blessings of our daughter recovered, unquote. And I get the feeling that this kind of sentiment was shared. So really a sad thing, and this is part of life in the 1800s. They show up and the measles is shared. And this is, again, I have to say, I've preached a lot of praise to a lot of people. One of the things I will say very, very vehemently is so grateful to live in a time when we have inoculations. But anyway, so they get measles, gets into her lungs. And this man, instead of staying and caring for her, leaves on his mission and this girl is healed. Not like that. That's being facetious, but you get the idea. Like he goes and the reward for that is this healing according to this account. So it's kind of a touching story there. Further in, we get from the revelation, let my servant David Whitmer and Harvey Whitlock also take their journey and preach by the way. Footnote 10 to this one is an interesting interpretation of this phrase, preaching by the way. So, on their way to Missouri, Whitmer and Whitlock passed through Paris, Illinois, where William E. McClellan heard them preach. He recorded in his diary that they expounded the gospel, the plainest I thought I ever heard. Whitmer bore testimony to having seen an holy angel who had made known the truth of this record to him, the Book of Mormon. As a result, McClellan decided to occupy the Mormon elders to Missouri and listen to them preach along the way. Although the men eventually separated in their travels, McClellan went on to Independence, Missouri, where on the 20th of August, he was baptized by Joseph Smith's brother, Hiram Smith. So sometimes you preach by the way, and sometimes you got sort of a fan, roadies going with you if you want to, in modern vernacular. So I thought that was kind of fun. Further to this, we also get in the revelation in the text, in consequence of transgression, let that which was bestowed upon Herman Bassett be taken from him and placed upon the head of Sidman's rider. Okay, who's that? Footnote 13 explains that Bassett was one of those who claimed to have visions and falling all over and, quote, frothing at the mouth, unquote. So we get this. Bassett apparently became disaffected prior to the conference. On 24th of May, the Painesville Telegraph Painesville Telegraph, carried this notice, quote, "One of the Mormon apostles named Bassett, a copy of whose commission we published some weeks since, which he pretended he obtained from the clouds with the seal of God, has recently abandoned the Bible speculation and declares it all to be a miserable hoax. Notwithstanding this article, Bassett was apparently presented at the 3rd of June conference, and Joseph Smith rebuked him directly, saying, quote, 'Him and Bassett, you sit still. The devil wants to sift you,' unquote." Yikes. So, again, people were very honest with their feelings back in this day. So, there you go. And they did it to their faces, not just on social media. Anyway, so we get a text read from his a little further into this revelation. "And again, let my servant Joseph and Sidney and Edward take with them a recommend from the church, and let there be one obtained for my servant Oliver Cowdery." Footnote 16 to this. It is possible the recommend mentioned here was designed to satisfy the demands of the federal Indian agent in the territory west of Missouri. In an 8th of April 1831 letter, Oliver Cowdery, then in Missouri, explained that, quote, "The agent for the Lamanites is very strict with us, and we think somewhat strenuous respecting our having liberty to visit our brethren the Lamanites. But we trust that when our brother Parley P. Pratt, returns, we shall have a permit from General William Clark, who is the superintendent of Indian affairs west of the Mississippi, who must have a recommend or security before he can give a permit for any stranger or foreigner to go among them to teach or preach," unquote. So the origination of this idea of a preaching license or a priesthood license could have been to try to get them to officially enter into Native American lands at the time, and that they had to go through these United States officers in order to do it. So there you go. Anyway, so that's what we have for you on part 2. So a general conference, some minutes there, some ordinations to the high priesthood, which I guess is the first time that they use the term Melchizedek priesthood, and then a section of the Doctrine and Covenants. So part 3 that we get, sections 53 and 54, and we're going to get into some interesting things here and introduce some important characters to it. So stay tuned for part 3. And we're going to keep pushing forward with part 3. So this is going to include sections 53 and 54 as we currently have it today. So section 53, the earliest copy that we get is from Revelation Book 1 in the handwriting of John Whitmer. There are some small grammatical changes, as you can see, and verse numbering, again, that we get from, I believe it is W Phelps, who is a publisher, so it makes sense that he was sort of organizing these things. Anyway, it is also found in Sidney Rigdon and Sidney Gilbert notebooks, which is good because, again, they're being referenced here. It is found in the manuscript history of the church, and it is also chapter 55 in the Book of Commandments and section 66 in the original Doctrine and Covenants. There are some differences between the 1981 and 2013 section headings, and it is only the date. We go from June of 1831 in the 1981 version to June 8th of 1831. Boom. Got a date there, which is great. Anyway, sorry. I have my entertainments where I get them. So the Revelation Book 1 introduction to this says, 56th Commandment, June 8th, 1831, a revelation to Sidney Gilbert, his call, etc. Both of the Sidney's copies give the same thing. It actually says a commandment of the Lord to Sidney, and that's Sidney Gilbert. The manuscript history gives 8th of June, 1831, Wednesday, shortly after the above was received, which was section 51, at his request, I, Joseph Smith, Jr., inquired of the Lord and received the following revelation to Sidney Gilbert, given June of 1831. Okay, so we get into the documents, volume 1, historical introduction. We get Sidney Gilbert, the recipient of this revelation, was Newell K. Whitney's business partner and an early convert to the church. He may have been present at a June 5th, 1831 meeting at which Joseph Smith taught that, quote, the elders would have large congregations to speak to, and they must soon take their departure into the regions west, unquote. The next evening, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation that commissioned a number of elders to accompany him to Missouri, which the text called, quote, the land which I will consecrate unto my people, which are a remnant of Jacob, and those who are heirs according to the covenant, unquote. The 6 June revelation did not name Gilbert among those who should travel to Missouri. Joseph Smith's history records that shortly after the reception of that revelation, Gilbert approached Joseph Smith and requested direction for himself. In response, Joseph Smith dictated this revelation that gave Gilbert assignments in the church, including the instruction to travel to Missouri with Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon. Gilbert left for Missouri on the 18th of June with Joseph Smith and Rigdon. Pretty good traveling companions. So that's what we get circumstantially. Little of the content of footnotes here. The text states inside of this revelation, and also to be an agent unto this church in the place which shall be appointed by the bishop, according to the commandments which shall be given hereafter. So footnote 4 to this, Gilbert was the first person to be appointed an agent unto this church. A previous revelation outlined the duties of Bishop Edward Partridge and called for the appointment of an agent. It says, quote, "Let there be an agent appointed unto this people to take the money and provide food and raiment according to the wants of this people," unquote. So there you go. Talking about agents, now you have an agent. That's Sidney Gilbert. Footnote 5 to the same thing says, once the elders arrived in Missouri, Gilbert was commanded by revelation to settle there and assist Edward Partridge with the church's temporal affairs. Specifically, the revelation directed Gilbert to keep a store and act as a land agent. So he quickly gets thrown into the thick of it. We need you to make a store. We need some goods here. And you're going to settle down, live here, and be a land agent. So there you go. This revelation, in a sense, is fulfilling an earlier one that says we're going to have a bishop, and the bishop is going to have agents. Now, again, in the current term of that, what we do now is the presiding bishop of the church is a bishop, as well as his counselors are also both bishops. And then, of course, there's many others that I'm sure that are designated as agents. So this sort of thing is still done today because the presiding bishop also handles in the current church like all of the humanitarian efforts as well. So it's quite a large calling. So you would need to have agents in order to function. So there you go. So that's section 53. And we'll be keeping that brief again for the sake of time, but that's all we get from the Joseph Smith papers. Going into section 54, the earliest copy of this revelation we get is from Revelation Book 1 in the handwriting of John Whitmer. We get some verse numbering here by William W. Phelps, and we get a take mark. If you want to go back to one of the earlier episodes that we have, take marks is at the end of, kind of marks the end of the fourth gathering of the Book of Commandments. So as they were going, they would basically make a little mark there and say, okay, we're going to end it here, and we're going to print a bunch of pages. They're going to be paginated, cut, and so forth, and that'll be the gathering that we put when we bind it together. So that's a take mark. It is found in John Whitmer's history. The previous versions of this are usually like, hey, insert revelation here. In this case, he actually writes it out. So there you go. Chapter 56 in the Book of Commandments. That's where you'll find this. And it is section 67 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. It is also found in the manuscript history of the church. And boy, do we have a big change here. There is quite a bit of difference between the 1981 and the 2013 section headings to this. So you do get June 1831 versus June 10th of 1831, which we have now. So a lot more specificity there. The headings have the same language about location. The members are arriving in Thompson and divided on questions about consecration, and then things get different. So the 1981 section heading continues by saying, selfishness and greed were manifest, and Leman Copley had broken his covenant to consecrate his large farm as a place of inheritance for the saints arriving from Colesville, New York. Ezra Thayer was also involved in the controversy. As a consequence, Newell Knight, president of the branch at Thompson, and other elders had come to the prophet asking how to proceed. The prophet inquired of the Lord and received this revelation. See also section 56, which we will be seeing in the future, which is a continuation of the matter. So we'll get to section 56 momentarily. But the 2013 heading says this: selfishness and greed were manifest. Following his mission to the Shakers, see the heading to section 49, Leman Copley had broken his covenant to consecrate his large farm as a place of inheritance for the saints arriving from Colesville, New York. As a consequence, Newell Knight, leader of the members living in Thompson, as opposed to president, and other elders had come to the prophet asking how to proceed. The prophet inquired of the Lord and received this revelation, which commands the members in Thompson to leave Leman Copley's farm and journey to Missouri. So quite a difference there in the language between these sort of modern scriptural things. And again, that's just the section heading. The rest is the same. So some introductions to this revelation. Revelation Book 1 gives us 57th Commandment, June 10th, 1831, a revelation to the church at Thompson, giving them directions what to do, etc. John Widmer's history gives us this. After this revelation was received, those elders were making all possible speed who were called to go according to commandment, to fill their missions in their several courses. At this time, the church at Thompson, Ohio, was involved in difficulty because of the rebellion of Leman Copley, who would not do as he had previously agreed, which thing confused the whole church. Finally, the Lord spake unto Joseph Smith, Jr., the prophet, saying, you get a revelation. The manuscript history of the church says, 10th of June, 1831, on a Friday, the branch of the church in Thompson, on account of breaking the covenant and not knowing what to do, sent in their elders for me to inquire of the Lord for them, which I did, and received the following. Revelation to Newell Knight, given June 1831. So those are the contemporary versions of it. The historical introduction from Documents, Volume 1 says, the arrangement with Copley apparently granted the Colesville members the privilege to live on the property in return for making improvements upon it. And according to Joseph Knight Sr., they, quote, all went to work and made fence and planted and sowed the fields, unquote. On 7th of May, Copley was called to preach along with Sidney Rigdon and Parley P. Pratt to the Shaker settlement in nearby North Union, Ohio. However, the missionary expedition failed to convert any of the Shakers, and the resulting confrontation between the Mormon elders and the Shakers apparently disturbed Copley. He soon went back to North Union, where he apparently reconciled with the Shaker community, and he then returned to Thompson with Shaker leader Ashbel Kitchell, perhaps intending to evict the Mormons. During his visit to Thompson, Kitchell held a meeting with the Mormons on Copley's farm, was involved in a contentious altercation, and initiated efforts to remove them. Joseph Knight Jr. recalled, quote, he had to leave his, or Copley's farm, and pay $60 damage, unquote, adding bitterly that the payment was for, quote, fitting up his houses and planting his ground, unquote. So they did not leave on good terms, and I would say if that's a true statement, like, what a jerk move, man. You, like, we did all this stuff to your house, and then you're going to charge us to leave? Like, so anyway, if it's true, kind of a bad situation there. So there you go. After 4 or 5 months, they were already trying to leave again. So historical introduction continues here. Because of the difficulties with Copley, Newell Knight, the presiding elder over the Colesville group, went to Kirtland to consult with Joseph Smith before the conference held in early June. Knight later explained that as a result of a revelation on the 6th of June, the last day of that conference, quote, we now understood that this, Ohio, was not the land of our inheritance, the land of promise. For it was made known in a revelation that Missouri was the place chosen for the gathering of the church, and several were called to lead the way to that state, unquote. Apparently, Copley was actually at this conference. We get this from footnote 8. Although Newell Knight explained that the problems with Copley occurred before the important conference in early June 1831, Copley was reportedly present at the conference, perhaps to learn how the land dispute would be resolved. His name was not among church office holders listed in the conference minutes, but Levi Hancock's account of the conference described not only Copley's presence, but his apparent possession by the devil, which was reportedly cast out by Lyman White. So little casting out action going on there in the conference. So that man of sin thing that they referred to there that was struck out apparently might have been referring to Leman Copley. Always fun stuff from filling in history. Some content and footnotes from this. We get this phrase from the text, but blessed are they who have kept the covenant and observed the commandment, for they shall obtain mercy. Wherefore go to now and flee the land, lest your enemies come upon you. Footnote 4 we get from the Painesville Telegraph. Man, I can't get away from the Painesville Telegraph. It says, concerning the eviction from Leman Copley's land, Joseph Knight Sr. explained that, quote, we sold out what we could, but Copley took the advantage of us and we could not get anything for what we had done, so we left the Copleys in June, unquote. According to the newspaper report, the group was forced, quote, to leave their spring crops all upon the ground, unquote. So maybe I take it a little back about the Painesville Telegraph. They also printed the other side of the story. So, kudos to you, journalisms, and very good for you. So we also get this from the text. And to pay monies for you, and thus you shall take your journeys into the regions westward unto Missouri, unto the borders of the Lamanites. And after you have done journeying, behold, I say unto you, seek ye a living like unto men, until I prepare a place for you. And again be patient in tribulation until I come. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me. Footnote 6 to this little phrase. After the group left Thompson, they departed Wellsville, Ohio, on the 3rd of June by boat and arrived in St. Louis on the 13th. From there, they traveled on the steamer Chieftain to Independence, Missouri. So that was the route. That's how they got there, by boat. And that is part 3. And we'll now be moving into our final part of this, which is going to be sections 55, 56, and 57, and a very short thing that is in Documents Volume 1 that they call Notes on Ordinations, a very short piece there. So hang in there with us. I know it's a long one, lots of drama from lots of different places, but hopefully you're enjoying this. So we're going to start part 4 here momentarily. Thank you. All right, barreling through part 4. This is sections 55, 56, and 57, as well as some notes on ordinations, not necessarily in that order, but here we go. So the paper's introduction to section 55, our first version that we get is in Revelation Book 1, handwriting of John Whitmer. Verse numbering by William W. Phelps. I am definitely sensing a pattern here. It is called chapter 57 in the Book of Commandments, and it is section 68 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. It is also contained in the manuscript history of the church, and it has the exact same language in the 1981 and 2013 section headings, with the exception, of course, of June 1831, as opposed to we now have June 14th, 1831. But everything else is the same in our modern section headings. Back in the day's headings, we get some introductions here. Revelation Book 1 gives us this. 58th Commandment, June 14, 1831. Revelation to William W. Phelps and Joseph Coe, their calling, etc. The manuscript history gives us this introduction. 14th of June, 1831, Tuesday. While we were preparing for our journey to Missouri about the middle of June, William W. Phelps and his family arrived among us, and as he said, quote, to do the will of the Lord, unquote. I inquired and received the following revelation to W. W. Phelps, given June 1831. So William W. Phelps is a huge character, and I'm going to do a little piece on him here in this part, and try to do this man justice. He has a very interesting story. So lighting into the section itself, though, the historical introduction gives us this from Documents Volume 1. This revelation was directed to William W. Phelps. In 1830, Phelps was the publisher of an anti-Masonic newspaper, the Ontario Phoenix, in Canandaigua, New York, about 14 miles from Palmyra. On the 9th of April, 2 weeks after the Book of Mormon was offered for sale, Phelps purchased a copy. He later wrote, quote, notwithstanding my body was not baptized into this church till June of 1831, yet my heart was there from the time I became acquainted with the Book of Mormon, unquote. In December 1830, he traveled to Fayette, New York to meet Joseph Smith and came away from the experience further committed to the new movement and convinced that he needed to, quote, quit the folly of my way and the fancy and fame of this world and seek the Lord and his righteousness, unquote. So he had some issues leaving his home, I will say that. So here you go. Further into the historical introduction. In late April 1831, shortly after the majority of church members left New York for Ohio, Phelps was arrested and imprisoned for 30 days in Lyons, New York, apparently over a delinquent debt he owed in Canandaigua. While incarcerated, Phelps relinquished the editorship of the Phoenix, and immediately after his release, he journeyed with his family to Ohio to join the Mormons. He reached Buffalo, New York on 12th of June, 1831, and was in Kirtland by the 14th of June. His arrival prompted this revelation, which directed that he be ordained an elder and that he assist Oliver Cowdery in doing, quote, the work of printing, unquote. Phelps was soon ordained an elder and later served as a printer for the Evening and the Morning Star. So according to Phelps's own account, this is from footnote 2, members of the Presbyterian Church and pretended anti-Masons sent their foolish clerk from Canandaigua and took me with a warrant and obtained a judgment against me on a balance of their account. This was done after I had engaged a passage home, having learned that my family were sick. An execution was sworn out on the spot, and I was hurried to jail in the course of the night, where I shall stay 30 days for a double purpose. Phelps later explained that he had been imprisoned as the result of actions taken by, quote, a couple of Presbyterian traders for a small debt for the purpose, as I was informed, of, quote, keeping me from joining the Mormons. So apparently they threw him in jail for his own good, so he wouldn't join the Latter-day Saint movement. So take that as you will. And then once he got out of jail, he got out of Dodge. So some content and footnotes here. We get this from the text. Behold, thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant William, yea, even the Lord of the whole earth, thou art called and chosen, and hast, after thou hast been baptized by water, which if you do with an eye single to my glory, you shall have a remission of your sins and a reception of the Holy Spirit by the laying on of hands, unquote. Footnote 2 for this says, Phelps later dated his baptism to June 16, 1831, 2 days after the dictation of this revelation. So things were moving fast. Further into the revelation, we also get, and again, thou shalt be ordained to assist my servant Oliver Cowdery to do the work of printing and of selecting and writing books for schools in this church, that little children also may receive instruction before me, as is pleasing unto me. Footnote 5 to that phrase says, in the first publication of the Evening and the Morning Star in Missouri, Phelps apparently referenced this portion of the revelation when he explained to the readers that, quote, those appointed to select and prepare books for the use of schools will attend to that subject as soon as more weighty matters are finished, unquote. No known copies of such books are extant, and it is unknown if any were actually produced. So sometimes you lose some. But that's the implication here. We don't have an indication that any of those books ever actually happened. So what's the aftermath of this? Well, what I wanted to do here, the aftermath of this revelation, is what did William W. Phelps become in the church? Like I said, he is a colossal influence in church history and a major influence to this day. So, a couple of things. He's the one that printed the Book of Commandments. He was the printer for that. He was the printer for the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. And by the way, I'm not even going to list everything here. He also helped print the Evening and Morning Star. He printed The Messenger and Advocate, another church periodical. This man was excommunicated 3 times and rejoined the church 3 times. In one of those instances, he testified against church leaders that led to their arrest and incarceration in Liberty Jail. He was actually one of the voices that led to Joseph Smith and others being incarcerated in Liberty Jail. So I'm not talking like, oh, I'm just speaking out. Like, he actually landed these guys in jail. But because of that, once the Liberty Jail ordeal was over, because of that, we actually do get a very famous and, in my opinion, a very beautiful forgiveness between Joseph Smith and William W. Phelps, wherein you get the famous Charles Wesley couplet, where there's letters being written back and forth between the two. Again, for time, I won't get into that. But at the end of it, it says, come on, dear brother, since the war is past, for friends at first are friends again at last. So it's a very famous sort of reconciliation between the two. So there you go. He also ran for lieutenant governor of the state of New York. And Dean Jesse, who's also a major figure in church history and for the Joseph Smith Papers specifically, somebody who I greatly admire just based on his works, feels like W. Phelps is one of the founders of an anti-Mason movement in New York. He definitely was an editor of the anti-Masonic periodical, which is a little awkward because being a Mason was a major part of Latter-day Saint religion, and a lot of the leaders were actually Masons. So, you know, whoops. Anyway, he was also the scribe for the Book of Abraham. He helped to develop something called the Deseret alphabet, which was apparently they wanted to make their own alphabet when they came to Utah. So there you go. He is the first printer of the Deseret News in Salt Lake City, which to this day, as of this recording, if you open up the Deseret News app, they're celebrating 175 years. And I will have to say that I am a former technical employee of that very organization. So I used to work for KSL Television, and I was on the engineering side. And originally, KSL Radio, which has been around for like 100 years, was a kind of a subsidy, if you will, of Deseret News. This is back in like 1923, right? 1922. Anyway, in 1922, excuse me, I know better than that. Anyway, so the Deseret News came up with a radio station called KSL, which KSL later had a TV station called KSL TV. So I am part of this. So again, William W. Phelps, thank you very much. It was a nice job while it lasted, right? Like so, but I actually worked for this kind of idea that the church publishes, right? And at the time, it was periodicals and books, and then became radio, then became film and television and all sorts of stuff, which to this day. So I had no idea. Maybe I should have known that earlier. But anyway, so his newspaper is still going to this day. They don't do printings every single day because it is the 21st century, but yeah, there's still a newspaper being printed and that started with W Phelps, apparently. The biggest thing I would say in terms of his contributions to modern Latter-day Saint theology and religion is his hymnal contributions. So if you've ever sang any of these songs, these were all written by William W. Phelps. So here you go. Ready? Adamon Diamon was written by William W. Phelps. Come all ye saints of Zion. Come all ye saints who dwell on earth. Come let us sing an evening hymn. Gently raise the sacred strain. Glorious things are sung of Zion. Hosanna anthem. If you don't know, when you're doing temple dedications, that Hosanna anthem was written by W. Phelps. If you could hie to Kolob. Now let us rejoice. Very famous song. Now we'll sing with one accord. O God, the eternal Father. I feel like we sing that about every month in sacrament meeting. Oh, stop and tell me, Red Man. Not really familiar with that one. I think we took that one out of the book for maybe obvious reasons. Praise to the man. That was W. Phelps. The Spirit of God like a fire is burning, and we're not ashamed to own our Lord. Now, Phelps also reworded a couple of popular hymns, turning them into uniquely Latter-day Saint hymns. So Joy to the World, if you don't know, was actually kind of retweaked for us. I think we say saints and angels sing, and some other people say heaven and angels sing. And I forget which one is which, but that was changed by W. Phelps. And then Redeemer of Israel was also modified by him. So huge influence. He is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery, and on the front of his tombstone, you're going to read, "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning." And on the back of it, "There is no end to matter, there is no end to space, there is no end to spirit, there is no end to race, there is no end to glory, there is no end to love, there is no end to being, there is no death above," which is the final phrase of "If you could hide a Kolob." So that's W. Phelps. A colossal figure, and somebody who was excommunicated and recommunicated 3 times. So, or is that 6 times? But anyway, yeah, a very interesting life from a very interesting man. So we're going to move right along into section 56. The first copy of this we have is in Revelation Book 1. It is in the handwriting of John Whitmer. It includes its own introduction section, which is kind of fun. We'll get to that in a minute. The verse numbering and punctuation by W. Phelps. Yes, that guy. Oliver Cowdery made an addition here in his own hand, which says, quote, "For according to that which they do," unquote. So that was a later insertion in the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery. There is another copy of this in a section that the Joseph Smith Papers calls a revelation in an unknown hand. As you can see here, it is called a commandment to the churches. And this letter, it seems to me, because it's folded that way, is held currently in the Church History Library. So, commandment to the churches. It is chapter 58 in the Book of Commandments and section 69 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. You'll also find it in the manuscript history of the church. There are some differences between 1981 and 2013 section headings here with the sort of the influence of the Joseph Smith Papers. So you get June 1831 originally, but now it is called June 15th, 1831. There you go. Now, the 1981 version of this says, quote, Ezra Thayer, who had been appointed to travel to Missouri with Thomas B. Marsh, was unable to start on his mission. And when the latter was ready, Elder Thayer was not ready to depart on his journey because of his involvement in the problems at Thompson, Ohio. Now, we talked about that. The Lord answered the prophet's inquiry on the matter by giving this revelation. The 2013 edition of this says, this revelation chastises Ezra Thayer for not obeying a former revelation, the commandment referred to in verse 8, which Joseph Smith had received for him, instructing Thayer concerning his duties on Frederick G. Williams' farm, where he lived. The following revelation also revokes Thayer's call to travel to Missouri with Thomas B. Marsh. So as you know, one theory behind this is that, he didn't build a house that he was supposed to be building. Yeah. Okay, so there you go. Some introductions to this. Revelation Book 1 has its own little section for this, which is nice. It says, 59th Commandment, June 15th, 1831. Thomas B. Marsh was desirous to know what he should do, as the Lord had commanded him and Ezra Thayer to take their journey to the land of Missouri. But Thayer could not get ready, as he said, as soon as Thomas wanted that he should, and these are the words of the Lord as follows. So this letter that we have written in an unknown hand only gives us this, received June 15, 1831. So really nothing there. Book of Commandments, Doctrine and Covenants, very, very brief, but the manuscript history does give us this. 15 June, 1831, Wednesday. Soon after I received the foregoing, which is section 55, Elder Thomas B. Marsh came to inquire what he should do, as Elder Ezra Thayer, his yoke fellow in the ministry, could not get ready for his mission to start as soon as he, or Marsh, could. And I inquired of the Lord and received the following. Revelation given June 1831 to Joseph Smith, Jr. Now, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, but when I was on a mission, they were called companions, but I think yoke fellow would have been awesome. Why aren't we using that? Just, I don't know, fill in the history a little bit there. So now we get into the historical introduction of Documents, Volume 1. It says this. Thayer and Marsh had been commanded in a June 6, 1831 revelation to take their journey, also preaching the word by the way unto this same land, Missouri. And 9 days later, Marsh was apparently ready to depart with others traveling to Missouri, while Thayer was not. An earlier revelation directed Thayer to board with Joseph Smith Sr. on Frederick G. Williams' farm. That same revelation directed that, quote, all the brethren immediately assembled together and put up an house for my servant Ezra, unquote, on Williams' property. It also instructed Thayer to, quote, humble himself, and at the conference meeting he shall be ordained unto power from on high, and he shall go from thence, if he be obedient unto my commandments, and proclaim my gospel unto the western regions with my servants, that must go forth even unto the borders of the Lamanites, unquote. So a footnote in this says, Thayer was also among those ordained to the high priesthood at the June conference associated with this revelation. So whatever happened to this? What happened to Ezra? Well, historical introduction gives us this. It is uncertain what prevented Thayer from accompanying Marsh, but this revelation refers to the former commandment which I have given him, Thayer, concerning the place upon which he lives, and the money Thayer had apparently paid for it. It is likely that he paid some of the balance Williams owed Isaac Moore on the farm where he and the prophet Joseph Smith Sr.'s family lived and worked, because the revelation asserts that, quote, there shall no divisions be made upon the land, unquote. Thayer may have previously requested that before his departure for Missouri, a title be assigned to him for the portion of land he had paid for, The revelation also suggested that he might have requested that the money he had paid toward the debt be returned to him if he was not assigned title. So why the revelation and why revoking the calls? Well, the 6th of June 1831 revelation had also directed that Newell Knight, leader of the Colesville branch, then located at Thompson, Ohio, and Sella Griffin traveled together to Missouri. Both men received further instruction in this 15 June revelation. Recent difficulties between the Colesville, New York believers and the landowner Leman Copley, who withdrew his offer to allow them to settle on his property, prompted a 10th of June revelation that directed the Colesville group to move to Missouri. That revelation further instructed the Thompson members to, quote, appoint whom you will to be your leader and to pay monies for you, unquote. Upon learning that revelations had both dictated their removal to Missouri and assigned their leader Newell Knight to leave them for a preaching mission, some of the members in Thompson may have voiced concerns to Joseph Smith. However, whatever the impetus, the revelation rescinded the command for Knight to leave on a mission and instead assigned Knight's previously named missionary companion, Sella Griffin, to accompany Marsh in place of Thayer. So a lot of shuffling around here, but apparently at the end of the day, it was Sella Griffin and Thomas B. Marsh as yoke fellows. Yoke fellows. Anyway, footnote 6 for this says, the compiler of Newell Knight's history in 1871 included this note, quote, I will here introduce the facts as nearly as I am able to glean them. On taking the revelation to Thompson concerning the removal of the saints from there to Missouri, which gave them the privilege of appointing their own leader, and also the revelation appointing him to his mission, it appears that the saints were grieved at the thought of Brother Knight leaving them, for he had been with them from their first acquaintance with the church, and they leaned on him as their guide and appointed him as their leader from Thompson to Missouri. This reached the prophet Joseph's ears, and in a revelation, Brother Newell's mission was revoked, and he was sustained in leading them. It is possible that this reconstruction of events was made with the benefit of sources that are no longer extant. So there you go. For the content of footnotes on this, we actually only get really scripture references. So I think it's been covered. I mean, we've kind of beaten this dead horse to death here. But that is it. So a little bit of shuffling around, what happened to Ezra Thayer and all this kind of stuff. I think it was just a conglomeration of quite a lot of things that were a problem. So that's it for that. Next, we're going to move on to a short section here that is called by the Joseph Smith Papers a note on ordinations. This particular thing is found in Minute Book 2, right under what we just read about the General Conference minutes. Okay, so you get your minutes, which I've already read, and then you get this little content. There is a historical introduction here from Documents Volume 1 that says, on the final day of the church conference held in early June 1831, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation calling many to travel to Missouri, preaching along the way. Some of those named in the revelation who had not yet been ordained elders were subsequently ordained. Although the document featured here, which recorded the ordinations in the minute book, bears a June 6th date, it appears to be a compilation of information about ordinations performed by Joseph Smith between the 6th and the 18th of June. So maybe not all this happened at the same time. So we'll just cut to the chase. Here it is. This is the note. It says June 6, 1831, Brothers Sidman Ryder, Sella Griffin, Daniel Stratton, Peter Dustin, Sidney Gilbert, and William W. Phelps were ordained elders of this church according to the church covenants and under the hand of Joseph Smith, Jr. And there you have it, a note on ordinations. I told you it was short. Now we're going to move into our final section. Good grief, this is a long one today. This is section 57. The earliest copy, again, is in Revelation Book 1 in the handwriting of John Whitmer. It is said not to be printed, and therefore is left out of the Book of Commandments. But it is also said here, number 6. What does that mean? We get a footnote in the facsimile edition of Revelations and Translations, Volume 1, which says, 7 of the 8 revelations published as sections 28 through 29 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants bear a similar notation in Revelation Book 1. John Whitmer numbered these revelations from number 1 to number 8, omitting number 2. So, I think that's kind of funny. It's like, whoops, I guess we forgot, number 2 ski there is not there anymore. So, whatever. So there you go. We also get some corrections here in the text, in the handwriting of Sidney Rigdon, which have been struck through. And then on top of that, you get the handwriting of W Phelps, which is an addition to the text, which says, quote, "Provide for my saints that my gospel may be preached unto those who sit in darkness and in the region of the shadow of death," unquote. There's also a copy of this revelation found in Sidney Gilbert's notebook, as well as in Revelation Book 2. Those both have copies, Revelation Book 2 in the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams. Okay. Once again, it is not found in the Book of Commandments, but it is found in section 27 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. We also get a copy of the Revelation in the manuscript history of the church, and we get some small differences in the section headings. And so in 1981, here's what you get. It says, "In compliance with the Lord's command," section 52, "the elders had journeyed from Kirtland to Missouri with many varied experiences and some opposition." And then the rest is the same. In the 2013 edition, we get, "In compliance with the Lord's command to travel to Missouri, where he would reveal, quote, the land of your inheritance," section 52, the elders had journeyed from Ohio to Missouri's western border. So there you go. Not a cataclysmic change, but a change nevertheless between those two versions. We get some introductions here. Revelation Book 1 gives us this. 60th commandment given in Missouri Independence, Jackson County, July 20th, 1831. Giving directions and to the bishop and agent how to proceed concerning purchasing lands, etc., etc. We do not get an introduction, as you can see, to Gilbert's notebook version. So it's just lights right into it. Revelation Book 2 gives us this. Revelation given in Independence, July the 20th, 1831, shewing that to be the place of the city of Zion and the gathering, with many, many, many dashes. 1835 Doctrine and Covenants simply gives us Revelation given in Zion, 1831. Which I think is kind of fun and simple. And then we get this from the manuscript history of the church. It says, the meeting of our brethren who had long awaited our arrival was a glorious one, and moistened with many tears. It seemed good and pleasant for brethren to meet together in unity, but our reflections were great, coming as we have from a highly cultivated state of society in the East, and standing now upon the confines or western limits of the United States, and looking into the vast wilderness of those that sat in darkness, how natural it was to observe the degradation, leanness of intellect, ferocity, and jealousy of a people that were nearly a century behind the times, and to feel for those who roamed about without the benefit of civilization, refinement, or religion. Yea, and exclaim in the language of the prophets, when will the wilderness blossom as the rose? When will Zion be built up in her glory? And where will thy temple stand, unto which all nations shall come in the last days? Our anxiety was soon relieved by receiving the following revelation, given in Zion, July 1831. There you go. Historical introduction to this from Documents Volume 1 says, leaving Kirtland, Ohio on the 19th of June, 1831, Joseph Smith reached Independence, Jackson County, Missouri, on the 14th of July. After arriving in Independence, Joseph Smith dictated this revelation on the 20th of June, 1831, identifying, quote, the land of Missouri as the land of promise. So there you go. And so now we have the land of Zion has been discovered. So further into the historical introduction we get, according to the history Joseph Smith initiated in 1838, Joseph Smith spent time upon his arrival in Independence ruminating on the situation of the American Indians living in the wilderness across the border, perhaps because an earlier revelation explained that the city of Zion was to be built, quote, among the Lamanites, quote, unquote. These meditations prompted him to ask questions about when and where the city would be built. Quote, when will the wilderness blossom as the rose? When will Zion be built up in her glory? And where will thy temple stand, unto which all nations shall come in the last days, unquote. In another account, Joseph Smith remembered, viewing the country before seeking diligently at the hand of God. According to that account, God manifested himself unto me. Let me go back. According to that account, God, quote, manifested himself unto me and designated to me and others the very spot upon which he designed to commence the work of the gathering. and the upbuilding of an holy city, which should be called Zion, unquote. The revelation designated Missouri as the land of Zion, established independence as the place at which to build the city of Zion, and designated the spot on which to build the temple. It also provided instructions to Partridge, who was appointed a bishop in February 1831, and Sidney Gilbert, who was designated in June 1831 as an agent to the church, on purchasing lands and distributing them to church members so that the members could gather in Missouri. It further assigned Gilbert to open a store and Phelps to establish a printing operation, which is eventually where you get the first versions of copied Revelations from, which is kind of fun. So let's get into it a little bit. The content. Some of the text states here, "Behold, the place which is now called Independence is the center place, and the spot for the temple is lying westward upon a lot which is not far from the courthouse." Always thought that was kind of fun in the scriptures. Footnote 5 to this says, "This courthouse was an almost completed brick structure built in the center of Independence's public square. The public square, on which the town of Independence was centered, was situated on the highest point of the gentle sloped bluffs on the southern side of the Missouri River between the Blue and Little Blue rivers." So that's the courthouse. Revelation further says later on, "Wherefore it is wisdom that the land should be purchased by the saints, and also every tract lying westward, even unto the line running directly between Jew and Gentile, and also every tract bordering by the prairies, inasmuch as my disciples are enabled to buy lands." Footnote 6 to this. The spot for the temple was on a western promontory of the same bluff as the courthouse, but outside the town's boundaries. Ezra Booth, who arrived in Missouri shortly after Joseph Smith, wrote that the temple spot was, quote, 1/2 of a mile out of the town, and on a rise of ground a short distance south of the road, unquote. The spot was marked at this time during Joseph Smith's stay in Missouri, and by the end of the year, Bishop Edward Partridge purchased a parcel of land, including the spot. My goodness, say that 10 times fast. Bishop Edward Partridge purchased a parcel of land. Yikes. Anyway, so there's your footnote. And so technically speaking, the temple was outside of city limits, but I guess when you're building a city of Zion, you get to set the city limits, which I think leads to some of the conflict between Independence and the Latter-day Saints. So anyway, we'll get to that much later in our episodes. Further into that, we have some more text which says, "And also let my servant Sidney obtain a license. Behold, here is wisdom, and whoso readeth him, let him understand. That he may send goods also unto the Lamanites, even by whom he will as clerks appointed in his service, and thus the gospel may be preached unto them." Now, we've already talked about this, about how these licenses are not just for like church. This is also for preaching to Native Americans. So we get footnote 14. "Since Oliver and his companions were ordered off the native lands, they needed to find another way to get to the native tribes. Ezra Booth stated, quote, "In addition to this, and to cooperate with it, it has been made known by revelation that it will be pleasing to the Lord that they form a matrimonial alliance with the natives. And by this means the elders, who comply with the things so pleasantly to the Lord, and for which the Lord has promised to bless those who do it abundantly, gain a residence in the Indian territory, independent of the agent," unquote. 3 decades later, William W. Phelps also recounted that Joseph Smith dictated a revelation to this effect. So I guess that means let's go marry some people from this group, which is a little strange, not something that I think was, as far as I can tell, really acted upon. But anyway, yeah. But I mean, and this is, there was a lot of intermarrying between the European settlers, if you will, and the Native American tribes. So a little of that is in my own family history. So I guess it's not out of the question, but something I really hadn't heard before then. So there you go. We further get to this a little further into the text. "And concerning the gathering, let the bishop and the agent make preparations for those families which had been commanded to come to this land as soon as possible, and plant them in their inheritance, and unto the residue of both elders and members, further directions shall be given hereafter, even so. Amen." So, who was ordered to go? Who was actually ordered to go to Missouri? We get this from footnote 16. Aside from the Partridge, Gilbert, and Phelps families, the only families who had been commanded to migrate to this point were church members originally from Colesville, New York, who had been relocated to Ohio. A June 1831 revelation instructed those members to continue to the western Missouri border. So this is the Leman Copley group. And that's it. Those are the only people that you have. Partridge family, yuck. Gilbert and Phelps families, as well as the Colesville Saints that were kicked out of their spot. So there you go. Now, I don't know if I've said this already. That's the end of our episode for today. The way that I've been doing this is I script this out. And generally speaking, my scripts are about 6 to 8 pages long. And I just wanted to let you know that with all that's been going on with this particular script is 18 pages long. So this might be the longest episode of the entire series. So thank you so much for sticking with this. If you stuck with this, again, we're on YouTube. This will be put in parts and the entire episode on YouTube and also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Very sorry for the length if that was a problem, but otherwise, a lot of really interesting and juicy details and a lot of clarifying things as we have done what we do, which is filling in the history. So have a great week and thank you so much. This is the amateur historian saying, my goodness, that was a very long episode. Have a good week.